This morning, I am in Santa Ana, California, visiting with Maryruth Storr, who is the director of the Orange County Public Law Library. Maryruth, it is our custom to begin these conversations by asking a little background information about you, such as what your life was like, not only today, but perhaps when you were also younger.
Well, I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. And except for 1 year of my life, I've always lived on the West Coast. So that's my basic background.
So you lived once east of the coast a little ways?
I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee for 1 year.
That's right. I recall now later in our questions today, we'll talk briefly about that as well. Good. Oh, that's nice. Nice part of the country. You've been walking around the last day or so since my son, who's traveling with me, and I arrived. We were down by the ocean last evening in the Malibu area. I'd never seen it and wanted to see the pier and some of the other stuff. And we did. We didn't get out of the car, though. Big crowds walking around.
Well, it was a nice day yesterday.
Yeah, it was. Well, perhaps in order to complete a sort of a picture of you as a person, can I ask if you have any particular hobbies or other passions that occupy time? Since whoever the judge is who's in charge will be perhaps listening by chance, we won't ask if you do it during work time, but you're about to retire, so maybe you have some in anticipation of the free time you think you're going to have after retirement. But don't be surprised. You'll fill it up and then you wonder how you ever had time to work.
I've been involved with music
Uh-huh.
most of my life. I play piano, cello, and organ. Except for my 3 years in law school, since I was a teenager, I've always been part of a church choir.
Mhm.
Moved down the vocal parts. I began at soprano and then moved to alto, and now I'm a tenor. I enjoy growing flowers and vegetables. My younger daughter created the hashtag Bailey Farms to describe our home. And many law librarians know that I do needlepoint. I would bring a project with me to a conference and people would come up and want to see how much I'd gotten done since the last time they saw the project.
So they're monitoring your work, so to speak.
Definitely.
Maybe they think they're going to be given whatever it is you're preparing. Surprise, surprise, that's probably not on the agenda. Yeah, that's great. Well, sort of moving on to get a little more about you, I know that you have 3 degrees, and more particularly, you earned each of them from institutions of higher learning in the Pacific Northwest, where I now live. You want to talk about that, what they are and where you got them?
I have a BA in history from Portland State University, a JD from the University of Oregon Law School, and my master's in law librarianship from the University of Washington.
Now that last degree, of course, is one that you and I have in common. Unfortunately, I was a tad farther back in getting mine than you were, but we won't get into that too in depth. But we studied under a person that the association members will recognize because the highest award for sustained professional service to the profession, the Marion Gould Gallagher Distinguished Service Award, is named in her honor. Could I ask you if there's any comments about Marion or studying under her that sort of strike you as something you'd like to mention today?
Marion was a formidable person until you got to know her better. She had high expectations for our class assignments. I think she also taught by example. And let me tell you a personal story to illustrate that. When I was finishing college, I had been accepted at 3 law schools and needed to decide which law school I was going to attend. I had never visited the University of Washington campus. So my mother paid for me to fly up to Seattle early one morning and then return that evening by Greyhound bus back to Portland. I went to the University of Washington campus, walked all around the campus, and then I went to the law school building, which at that time was not on the campus proper. It was several blocks away. And I walked through the law school building and the library, the many floors of the library. Then I approached the circulation desk and asked if I might speak to Mrs. Gallagher about where I chose to go to law school would have an impact on being accepted into the Master's in Law Librarianship program. A few minutes later, I was ushered into her office, and we talked briefly, and her advice was I should go to the University of Oregon Law School because I'd pay in-state tuition there.
Very sensible, I'm sure, from a financial standpoint especially.
Absolutely. And on a personal one as well, because that's where I met my late husband. And that willingness to be open and meet with someone who had an interest in librarianship, I will always remember that. And when that has occasionally arisen in jobs where I've been, I've made the effort to meet with someone and talk to them briefly to just continue that effort that Marion made.
Well, you couldn't have been too terribly intimidated if you dared to come to the place and sight unseen asked if you could meet with her and ask her some questions, so that's good. I used to occasionally, well, almost every morning, pop in while she was there early and I was there to allegedly study, and I'd come up, get some coffee in the staff area and go down to Stacks where I had a Carol, and I'd often talk to her in the morning. She was always very friendly. I don't know, she apparently got all her work done even with the interruptions of people like me. She could have thrown me out and that would have been enough, but she didn't. Well, you eventually finished up your education, including the Master of Law Librarianship degree from under Marion's guidance, and then you moved to your first position, which was as Associate Law Librarian at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And there you worked with another one of, at least my good friends, probably yours too, Barty Wolf, our late colleague. You want to talk a little bit about that era and perhaps some of what was going on? Because I know there were some interesting things going on of a sort that was more common then in law libraries than it is today.
My responsibilities included supervising reference, circulation, and government documents. I learned a lot about dealing with odd library floor plans. Most of the building at that time had been from the 1940s, although they had had an addition probably about 1960. There was a move to make the law library separate from the university library.
Yeah,
But Barty was really the one who handled all those political situations, and so I really can't comment on that.
I interviewed for this same job when I was first getting out of Marion's program, and I picked up very quickly that the head of the library system, of which the law library was part, had his views on governance that were very different from those in the law school. And I decided at that point that that was a situation I was not inclined to want to take on. But Barty saw it differently, apparently. Eventually was successful, and this library did move to being under the direct budget and supervision of the law school, which is what the American Bar Association certainly was encouraging in those days very much. Well, I assume you had a mentor, to two or more along the way. I'm sure Marion would be in that category, but is there anybody else who perhaps played that role in your life?
Marion was definitely a mentor for me.
Mm-hmm.
She helped me obtain professional positions. Although they were not formal mentors, I did learn by example and observation from several of the law librarians I worked for. Dennis Hyatt and Rick Searles at the University of Oregon, and Stanley Pierce at O'Melveny and Myers.
Mm-hmm. Well, you had some interesting people as mentors there. I was fortunate to know all of them. I guess we're a small enough group that that's not uncommon. Can I ask you another sort of question that I often put in here about this point, and that is, in deciding to become a law librarian, you talked to Marion before you'd start law school. Often I sort of asked, when you decided this, and did you go to law school intending to practice law? In your case, it looks like you had your mind set on becoming a law librarian. And, if that's correct or not correct, tell me. But
That is correct.
did anyone play a role, or how did you decide on this particular niche of the legal profession?
I had a family friend when I was in high school who had been a classmate in library school of Marion Gallagher's. And she told me of the Masters in Law Librarianship program. So I started college with the idea that that would be my career focus. I also worked at the medical school library in Portland, Oregon when I was in high school. The director there was another family friend who had actually introduced my parents to each other in the 1940s. So I knew of special librarianship as a area of specialization in library work. Science classes were not my strong point, so medical librarianship was not going to be a good career path. So I chose law librarianship. And upon graduating from college, I went to law school. While I was in law school, I worked in the technical services department of the University of Oregon Law School Library for 2.5 years, including a summer as the serials check-in clerk. That gave me a different perspective on law library work than a regular law student might have obtained. I did some clerking for a law firm when I was in law school, but I never really intended to practice law. However, I did feel that taking the bar exam was an important final step in legal education. So I did take the Oregon bar exam, and I've now been a member for 40 years, and an active member, which became quite challenging once the mandatory continuing legal education requirements were implemented in the 1980s.
Yeah.
But I have done it, and there is a potential that I will do some pro bono work after I move to Oregon at the end of this summer.
That's right. You're going to retire and move up to the area near Portland.
I am.
I think off campus, but yeah. That sounds interesting. Well, you did have a stint in the so-called real world, as some of our colleagues call it, the firm world, not as a practicing lawyer as such, but you left the University of Tennessee and went to O'Melveny and Myers, which I assume was here in the LA area, the office here.
That's correct. The
Yeah.
firm was founded in Los Angeles in 1885, and Los Angeles is its headquarters.
Yeah.
When I came in 1979, the library was a pretty substantial operation.
Okay.
We had 5 professional librarians besides the director, about 15 staff, and an outsourced filing service. We had the main library on the 38th floor of the building, but on 6 other floors there were branch locations. We used Arlen for cataloging, and had a card catalog. While I was there, we moved to a microfilm catalog, which meant we were able to put a copy of the catalog updated every 3 months in each office of the firm's locations. As I was leaving, we were transitioning to an integrated library system so that they would have an online catalog. We provided reference service from Los Angeles to all of the firm's offices except for the Washington, D.C. office. They did have library staff there. By the time I left, we had hired librarians for the Century City office, the Newport Beach office, and the New York City office. So while we were still handling some of the support work, we received most of the materials for the California offices and then would process them, catalog, and then ship them out. They were then able to handle their own reference needs. Initially, we performed Lexis searches for attorneys. As we moved into the 1980s, then we began to provide Lexis and Westlaw training for attorneys, and so they would do their own searches at that point. So that was a big transition. Shortly after I arrived, we began planning a new library. The firm was building a high-rise office building on Bunker Hill in downtown Los Angeles. So it was really an enjoyable experience to be able to design a library you'd like to work in and make services available. At that time, firms were still supporting the library financially on a large scale. So we had about 2/3 of one floor of the building for the library, including 2 large walls of windows. These days that doesn't happen in law firms anymore, that were adjacent to the study tables. And we took the opportunity to consolidate the collections. I mentioned they were on all those different floors.
I remember a lot of firms had collections, specialized parts of them scattered to wherever the practice
Correct.
group
So
was.
as we planned for this move, the tax and estate planning materials did stay separate, but everything else was consolidated to one location on the 13th floor. And we were able to reduce the duplication. We'd had 5 copies of California reports, and we went down to 3 copies. And through planning, we were able to accomplish the move and the consolidation in 2.5 days over a weekend. So it was a big challenge, but we accomplished it.
Now, in those days, many of the firms were sort of not yet as sophisticated as the one you went to, Albany, in terms of things. That was developing. I know in the D.C. area, a number of the very large ones were doing or were doing what you were doing or getting to that point pretty soon. It was also a day and age when we didn't have the computers that we have today. I mean, you had Lexis and Westlaw and probably had some time getting some of the older attorneys, for example, to actually use them themselves. I remember the pictures of Lexis training in the early days where the attorney would be standing there next to the secretary who would actually do all the keyboard stuff, and he'd be telling her what to put in and so on. But that finally changed, and everybody sort of developed these skills themselves. And I guess
Or in the larger firm, the senior partner would ask an associate to do the work. That
well, in
happened
the old
often.
days, they probably would have done the same thing, but the work would have been done in using books instead of a combination of online traditional resources. So
Very true.
Things didn't change that much in that sense, I guess. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, you were there for about 9 years.
Correct.
And then you decided to come back into the public sector. It's, I think the Orange County Public Law Library is really very much that way. And get away from the central part of the city of Los Angeles, because we're out here in Santa Ana. It's very pleasant out here. Everything is low rise. You don't have the huge skyscrapers and so on. You want to talk to us a little bit about the experiences you've had here at the Public Law Library? You've been here now roughly almost 30 years.
That's right. Historically, the Orange County Public Law Library was the primary legal research center for Orange County, because until 1988, there was not an accredited law school in Orange County. So we had a 50-state collection, statutes, case reporters, citators. We had a comprehensive law review collection, a very large microforms collection. We had 4 professional librarians in addition to the director, and a total of about 30 staff, many of whom were part-time to work the extended hours we were open, Saturdays and evenings. We cataloged on Arlen and had a card catalog. In 1992, we transitioned to Innovative Interfaces as an integrated online system. At that point, the staff all got personal computers on their desks, and our workflows really changed. When I first arrived, our reference librarians would do Westlaw searches for attorneys on a cost recovery basis. But eventually we added patron computers and got database subscriptions, so then patrons were doing their own searches. By the end of the 1990s, we were totally out of space in our original building here, which had been built in 1969, 1970. We were out of space for staff, for the collection, and technology. The Law Library Board of Trustees and the County Board of Supervisors agreed that there would be an expansion and renovation of the Law Library building. And that work was done 2004 to 2006. And we now have 47,454 square feet in our facility, which was a 69% increase from what we had before.
So you died and went right to heaven with all that space.
It made a big difference in how we were able to work. We were able to put sets back together again. For example, the Law Reviews collection, the most recent 20 years of all the titles were on one floor, and the prior volumes of a title, back to volume 1 of whenever the title started, were on another floor. So we were able to put those back together. As times have changed, we had fewer attorney patrons coming to the library, as they had online access in their own offices.
Sure.
And around the same time, we had more members of the general public coming, trying to figure out how to handle some legal issue they had on their own without hiring an attorney. So that was a big change for us as we moved into the 2000s. And then budget issues became a big concern. In the state of California, county law libraries are funded by a fixed dollar amount of the first paper civil filing fee in Superior Court. And that fixed dollar amount has not changed since 2008. Cases, the number of cases on which a filing fee is paid have declined significantly.
Oh,
And statewide, the decline in our income is about 37%. So for us here in Orange County, that meant our annual budget went from about $4.1 million to $2.7 million. It's a big drop, especially at a time when the legal publishers have been substantially increasing their selling price for their materials. So we've had to make a lot of changes in the collection. Our 50-state collection is now all online, not in print anymore. Same with our law reviews collection. Our citators are all online now, not in print anymore. We've made reductions in the number of loose leaf services and loose leaf treatises that we support. We've been fortunate. Not all county law libraries have been able to maintain the print versions of practice materials and form books. We have been able to do that, and that's beneficial. The attorneys really prefer using the print format for those types of materials, and it's much easier for a self-represented litigant to use a print product rather than online. So we've been fortunate, we've been able to do that. Our staff is now a total of 15, 5 professional positions and 10 support staff.
That's actually a pretty good ratio of librarians to not librarians.
It is.
From a historical perspective. Yeah. Now, in today's pro se's, or whatever these folks are that come in where we call them, with so much stuff on computer, digital format, does your staff have to intervene and assist them more than once was the case with book resources?
We generally start them with the print books.
Okay.
We'll take them to a practice book. We have a full collection of the Nolo Press materials that are written for the non-lawyer. We'll start them there, and then if they need an example of a form, we have forms of pleading and practice. We'll say, well, you'd want to look in there for the kind of document, and then you'll adapt it using your own fact situation.
Well, I had a chance briefly to kind of glance around the library as we came in. It's a very nice facility and very attractive and very inviting from my perspective.
Thank you.
We've had no trouble at all. I was expecting, since this is in a court complex, that we might have tighter security at the door, but nothing particularly out of the ordinary there, and even less.
As a freestanding location,
Yeah.
we are not subject to the security restrictions that some of the county law libraries are, where they're actually located physically within the courthouse.
I went to one of the county law libraries actually in the Metro DC area, and we did some of these sit-down interviews for the oral history. And when I arrived at the door to go in, the guards saw the equipment I was bringing in. And those days I had lighting and some other stuff I don't need today here. And they wouldn't let me in. And the librarian, I won't mention the name or the county or anything, had to come down and vouch for me. Even then, I think the guards were very nervous because of the risks they feel they have to be out watching out for and preventing. So it was interesting. Here it was a much nicer experience. Even parking here is very convenient. It's sort of just immediately adjacent to your entrance area, and it worked out very well. That's another thing I worry about when I go into a city area of some sort, which is, we're in the downtown part of your city here, I guess.
We are, but as part of the suburban mentality, everyone always wants parking right next to where
Especially
they're
in
going.
California.
That's
Yeah,
right.
why not? Yeah. Well, sort of moving on, I want to ask you a little bit about some of the service to the profession that you've had over the years. There's been quite a bit. At one point, back about 1985, you were involved in managing one of the old rotating institutes. I think it was still one of those.
Yes.
Cataloging and management of legal information.
Correct.
And later you were president of the Southern California Association of Law Libraries, and also at the time chair of AELL's Council chapter presidents. You want to talk a little bit about some of that work, perhaps also start by talking about the rotating institutes of that year, because not many places in this oral history have we addressed that topic. That was a big deal in those days. And then some of your other work, sort of professionally, that you would like to mention.
The rotating institute that I co-directed with Marilyn Nicely from the University of Oklahoma had originally been focused just on cataloging. And when I was asked to co-direct it by Alan Holler, he wanted to expand it to the management of legal information, which was something that law firms were really trying to be more involved with. So we did that. It was held at the Cornell Law Library, a beautiful setting.
Way out of the way in Ithaca, though.
Very true.
Yeah.
Marian Gallagher always made it clear to her students that there was an expectation of professional association involvement from early on in your career. So I have served on an AALL committee almost every year that I've been a law librarian. I've been active in several special interest sections and my local chapter, SCAL. I did serve as chair of the Council of Chapter Presidents and chair of the Special Interest Section Council. And that, along with my term on the AALL Executive Board, really gave me some insight into how this large professional association operates. Much of the committee work is routine, things just happening year to year, but some of them had a greater impact. I served on what was then called the Washington Affairs Office Special Committee in 2007, 2008. I was chair of the Bylaws Committee in 2011, 2012, when AALL did revise its bylaws by membership vote. I had a lot of fun serving on the local advisory committee for the 2008 annual meeting in Portland, Oregon, where I chaired the hospitality subcommittee. Even though I lived 1,000 miles from Portland, I was able to do that. Often involvement in one activity leads to another. I should also mention that I chaired the state court and county special interest section in the year that we voted to change our name to the government law library special interest section. So that was a significant event in the life of the group. Since I've come to this job, I've been active in the Council of California County Law Librarians. I've been president, secretary treasurer, and I was chair of the legislative committee for many years. Our focus is to provide training opportunities for the newer law librarians, particularly in the smaller counties, and to advocate for increased funding from the legislature. I've served on the LLMC Board of Directors and the Advisory Council. And this year I'm chairing the Law Librarians Working Group of the Self-Represented Litigation Network. I found that a lot of times involvement in one activity leads to another, and that keeps things varied. You're doing different things, and that makes it an enjoyable part of being a professional.
I agree with you. You meet a lot of people, more of them, I think, than you would otherwise be able to meet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's always
Absolutely.
its own reward. Well, Maryruth, I know from your description that you have done an awful lot of things to be professionally active, and I think in 2017, almost at 1917, old habits, I guess, real old ones, you received the AAL's Hall of Fame. You were inducted into that, and that is, of course, indicative of the kind of work you have done over the years, the sustained work, and all of the, your reputation for doing it well, obviously. You would have been considered for that award.
It was an honor to receive that.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, it's been competitive to get those awards, those higher awards. I was on the committee for about 3 years, recent years, that works with awards. And it was tough work, selecting who among some very, very highly qualified people one should select, because there are limits. I think they're only allowed to have 4 inductees into the
That
Hall
is
of Fame,
correct.
as such, every year. Yeah. So that made the work we had all the harder. So congratulations on
Thank you.
well-deserved recognition. Yeah. Now, you mentioned as we were preparing over the last few weeks to have this session that I should ask about your multi-type library consortia work. And you've mentioned some stuff right now, but it's mostly other law libraries. Do you want to expand on that to some of the other multi-library type work you're doing?
I have been quite involved in California in multi-type library work. I have found that it's beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
It exposes other librarians to what law libraries do, particularly those of us in the public sector, that we are here for all residents of the state, and we're not just for lawyers. And it also exposes us as law librarians to the services these other libraries are providing, which can give us referral, information ability for the people that we're helping here. This work began when I was at the law firm, Albany and Myers. A number of special librarians in the downtown area formed a group called Best Friends, which was to support the business, economics, and science technology departments of the Los Angeles Public Library's Central Library. They had very strong collections that were very helpful to us in our work at the law firms or the banks, the big special libraries that exist in any major metropolitan area. I was also elected as a special library representative to the class board of directors, which was the Cooperative Library Agency for Systems and Services. And it was a multi-type organization in California aiming to provide services to libraries. Shortly after I came here, the California State Library was exploring developing a multi-type library network, and I served on the California Library Networking Task Force from 1990 to 1998, which is when the state legislature passed the Library of California Act. So then I was involved with the local library network for Los Angeles and Orange counties. Our network was the Arroyo Seco Library Network. In 1999 to 2000, I was part of the core planning group, and then I was the network chair from 2000 to 2003. Unfortunately, in 2003, the legislature defunded the Library of California. So shortly after that, some of the people who had been active in the Library of California formed a new group, Khalifa, as a 501c3 organization,
Okay.
as a membership group to provide services and support to California libraries. I was elected to the Khalifa board in 2000 and served until 2014. And I still serve as parliamentarian to that board of directors, so I'm still involved with it.
So you keep them focused on the agenda and the straight and narrow, huh?
As a 501c3 organization, there are requirements for how you need to proceed and take action and act in accordance to your bylaws.
Exactly.
So I help them with that. And here in Orange County in 2013, the public libraries revived the Santiago Library System Cooperative. And the Orange County Public Law Library became an associate member. And those connections with local public libraries have really been valuable. Our professional staff is able to serve on subject committees with librarians from other libraries, and so those interconnections are really valuable.
That's an interesting comment because for many years we in law librarianship tended to stay somewhat separate from our brother and sister and other types of libraries. And I think we have found in more recent times that kind of approach to the profession, the broader profession, is not in our interests.
I've always thought there were more similarities than differences
That's right.
among types of libraries. And when we can have connections with other types of libraries, whether it's within law librarianship, the distinction between academic or firm or government, isn't that significant? And then we have the broader connections as well.
We've talked off and on throughout this session about budget realities changing, and the ways we, as a profession, were able to do things perhaps before, and why we may have had to change, because the collections and media that's used for law books and so on isn't books anymore. It's books to the point that it's also digital, whatever. A lot of that, from what I've heard in talking to colleagues around, a lot of the changes in the financial arrangements primarily occurred sort of starting with the 2008 recession, and the legal profession as a whole had a tremendous sort of a change imposed on it about what they could afford and how they should be doing business. And, you want to talk a little more about how that has sort of impacted perhaps your own library a bit more, or other libraries with which you're familiar, especially in the legal field?
There has been a real financial change. I mentioned the decline in the filing fee support for California's county law libraries. And that has led all of us in California to some very difficult decisions, cutting core materials at some times. It is fortunate there's the ability to have access to some materials online, but it can't be comprehensive and complete. And I'm a bit old-fashioned. I would rather own the content that the library has purchased instead of merely licensing it. And there's always the potential it will vanish in a split second if you can't meet the publisher's demands.
I would think the budget implications for you as the head librarian, director, got to be tremendous in that you have people coming into the library who will need to use some of these online resources where you're basically renting the use, paying a licensing fee.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on how much of that use there is, it must in some way impact on how much money you have to pay for those services. I'm sure you're not getting a flat rate with unlimited usage or anything like that. And
Not for the entire content on any of the services. We have negotiated licenses for specific collections from the different publishers. We try not to overlap, but sometimes we do. One of the ways we're able to help people coming in is by partnering with other legal services providers. And that can be with the court's self-help centers. That's our most prominent connection here. In California, every superior court is supposed to have a court self-help center for assisting people who need it in certain subject areas. At the court self-help center, they're able to review pleadings before they are filed, make sure all the appropriate boxes have been checked, all the important information is included, things like that, so that when the matter gets to the courtroom, the judge isn't going to reject it because of some formality. But there are other areas where they can't help them, and so then people get referred to us. Here in Orange County, the Self-Help Center does not assist people in filing or drafting motions. Mm-hmm. And once you get past the first paper, that's the next step in the court procedural process. Yeah. So we help them with that by having form books and examples. They're able to use our public computers to do that drafting. So that's a way that we're partnering with the Self-Help Center. We have a prescription pad that we've given the Self-Help Center so that they can write on it, this person needs to do this kind of motion. Mm-hmm. So that when the individual comes over here, we have a starting point and are able to get directly to helping them rather than, again, trying to get them to tell us what they understand the need to be, which is sometimes a bit not actually what was told to them.
Yeah. So a little incorrect, in other words.
Sometimes. But our prescription pad, which was first developed by the Sacramento County Public Law Library, and I think most of us in California have adapted it because it's so helpful.
That's interesting. 50 years ago, when I was in my early days in the profession, I was in Houston, University of Houston, and my director and I went up to Austin one day, and which was a trip we did actually occasionally. Mm-hmm. We were at the Supreme Court up there, talking to someone in the clerk's office, and we asked a question that was sort of off the wall. We had noticed that for most of the Supreme Court briefs and opinions, there would be a docket number, which you see in all the other courts, basically a sequence. But they had a group of dockets that started off with the letter O and C, standing for, and we asked what this was. Those are our clients, we were told, and they were the people who needed the kind of help you described the libraries and courts here are offering. They would file these pro se appeals and so on, and the court would assign them one of these docket numbers occasionally, or whoever did the assigning, And that was a flag to have some of the clerks and so on do more extensive research to try and fix little glitches in it that might otherwise help with the, getting to the just result, was the rationalization. It was nothing that they really publicized, except that, this one group of cases would occasionally see this odd docket number.
That's very interesting,
Yeah.
that
And
they
that
were
was about 50
willing
years ago.
to take those extra steps.
Yeah. Well, Maryruth, we're probably nearing the conclusion of today's conversation for the oral history. And it's customary to ask if there's anything that we've not talked about that you think you would like to bring up.
Well, I do want to thank you and the Hein Company for inviting me to do this interview. It is an honor to be included among the other law librarians in this Spinelli collection.
Yeah. Well, we're delighted, or I'm delighted especially, that you were willing to say yes when we approached you, but in accepting your thanks, I don't really need any, because this is so much fun for me to go around at this point in my life and visit so many old friends like yourself, Maryruth, and talk to you about your, profession and what you've done as part of it. A very successful career over a fairly broad span of years.
40 years since I graduated from the University of Washington.
And you went into it planning from early on that was the direction, which is something I do not encounter very often in those responses to that question. Yeah. Usually most of us are like I did. I worked in the law library actually as a 15-year-old kid for a while, throwing books out for where Mary Gallagher was. I happened to grow up in Seattle, and the next door neighbor was the dean of the law school in those days. That's how this happened. And you'd think with that experience, I'd be like you, I'd be planning ahead. Well, I didn't plan ahead at all, or at least not very far. I figured, well, my first goal after that was to get into college, then figure out what I would major in, and then graduate. And then I decided to go to law school, but only after I took the LSAT and found I could get in to the law school. So, and then it was my third year in law school, and I was approached by the then dean, different one than the one that I grew up next door to, saying, you might want to consider law librarianship. And he gave me the rationalization, and it was a good one. So I never looked back after that. It was nice. But not quite like your process. Yours is a lot more planned and deliberate. Mine was a little too ad hoc, I think. But the result was the same. Well, perhaps with that said, Maryruth, I want to thank you for taking time today to host me here at the Law Library and to speak with me here on camera for the oral history. And in thanking you, I'm doing it not just on my own behalf, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodak, and of course Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have the honor of working to put together this oral history of law librarianship for the Hein Online database. Thank you.
Thank you.